Kia ora, Mr Speaker. It is my pleasure to speak on the Child and Family Protection Bill in this its third reading. And I note that the bill has been divided into three bills at the Committee of the Whole stage, that being the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill number 2, the Care of Children Amendment Bill and the Adoption Amendment Bill. I haven't had the pleasure of speaking on this bill before today, and I do particularly want to talk about domestic violence and the impact of domestic violence in our communities. I was in a position in my previous employment as Principal Advisor in the Office of the Children's Commissioner to actually sit on the Waitakere Task Force on Family Violence, and it was a pleasure to sit on there with people such as Penny Hulse, who's now the Deputy Mayor of Auckland City. And one of the things that really hit me in those meetings, because they were meetings facilitated by the New Zealand Police, they involved NGOs, they involved people who were in the care of not only the children but also families involved in family violence. And we met on a regular basis, and a lot of what struck me in the process was that children do seem to be missing when we look at family violence engagement in New Zealand, unfortunately. The police are very good at ensuring that the protection in that immediate point is dealt with. So I have had the pleasure already of going out with the police, and on the day I went out there were 3 incidents, and it was an incident between a husband and wife, and there was a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old who were in the house at the time. And I think the thing that has struck me really is the impact of family violence on our families, but particularly our children. So we have a process called FVIAS, this Family Violence Interagency process, where the police, Women's Refuge, SIFs and NGOs come together. And they come together to work towards solutions that will ensure that our families are safe and that our families have the support that they need. But often in these meetings, I do think that the particular needs and specific needs of the children aren't adequately addressed. There are issues about, what other agencies can be involved, and I do think that it's important, particularly for children of school age, that the schools that they belong to, the principals, the teachers that are working with children, actually are informed when the children have come from a family violence incident, because I know from visiting Ramwick Park School on Monday and talking to the principal, she was very clear that children do behave differently, and they know something's wrong. They might not know what is wrong, but I think a much more strategic approach in ensuring that the people that are going to be looking after our children, and I consider teachers and the context of school looking after our children, actually are aware when children come from families that have family violence issues. From my experience of the FVIAS process, it seems to be really focused on either helping the victim or helping the offender. Children aren't so much considered in that process, but there doesn't also seem to me to be a focus on the family and actually how can we make families functional. So we have contracts where one group will look after the offender, one group will look after the victim, but there's very little engagement, I think, in ensuring that families actually are supported. So this bill is incredibly important because it does, I think, place the focus on the children, but a different aspect of that. And having come into the House to be asked to speak, it was quite interesting because Labour is supporting this bill, but just the history of it. So the history of this piece of legislation stemmed from a Justice Ministry review of the Domestic Violence Act 1995 and other related legislation. So the House will know that Annie King introduced the Domestic Violence Reform Bill that took into consideration the submissions from 103 submitters who represented both private individuals, academics, the legal profession and non-governmental agencies representing domestic violence specialists, social assistance and public interest groups. And so we've had this, compilation piece of legislation put together. It is good to see that we are going to focus, as I said before, on what the needs of our children are and what the needs of families are. But I still think that we should be reviewing the FVI's process with a specific emphasis on the needs of the children. Some of the questions I think need to be asked are, do the children have a GP? Are the children enrolled with well child providers? Are the children attending early childhood education centres? Because for a number of the children who come from families where family violence unfortunately is a normal set of behaviours, there are a whole lot of social issues that actually contribute to the circumstance. Those social circumstances relate to the fact that their parents may not be working, that they may be living in conditions where their housing isn't as adequate as it could be. They may be living in conditions where poverty actually plays a large role, and actually families end up being stressed. Someone in the family partakes in alcohol and then becomes violent. So some of the peripheral and environmental issues related to ensuring that our children and family are actually protected also, I think, have to take into consideration, for example, the density of liquor outlets. And actually, is there a correlation between family violence and some of our communities where there is a density of liquor outlets which actually normalises alcohol, not only for the families but the children who come from communities where there is a liquor outlet, attached to their particular dairy. So I do think that there needs to be more of an emphasis on children. If we're going to look at child and family protection within the context of family violence, I do think that we should be looking at ensuring that the children who come from these situations have the best start in life, have the best opportunities to, particularly in the early years, to start on a pathway which is going to ensure that they can, enjoy our public and free education system. Because one of the issues that we have, actually, is in these FVI's meetings, the only time the children are actually discussed are if SIFS needs to intervene. And actually, these are our most vulnerable children. And so I find it really interesting when the government has a green paper and they talk about the green paper and who our vulnerable children are. Actually, we know who they are, and they're the cohort of child who this bill is trying to protect. But it's broader than that, because it's not only the children who need the court to intervene to keep them safe. Actually, it's the children who get caught up in family violence in the first place. And they are in a position not in their own control. And so, I think it's very interesting when you look at the intent of this bill, and actually when we look at whether or not the children who live in situations where family violence has a major impact on their life, actually whether or not they're getting all the public good services that they need. Because we have a well child schedule in New Zealand that guarantees every New Zealand child between the age of, from when they're born to 5, they're supposed to receive 8 visits on the schedule. The ultimate visit is called a B4 school check. And I think it's really interesting if we look at these children and actually ask them questions about whether they have a GP, whether they're enrolled with well child, whether they have their B4 school check, and actually whether or not they get the ECE subsidy if they're entitled to it. And then if you look at the layer below SIFS intervention, we have a strengthening families model, and that strengthening families is actually supposed to ensure that children, and a lot of children who live within the context of family violence, actually have the best start in life and have access to public good resources that are going to ensure that they can grow up and fulfil their potential. It has been a pleasure speaking at this late stage, and I thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Kanwal Bakshi.